You move through life assuming that knowledge grants truth. If something seems clear, you trust it. If it feels consistent, you treat it as certain. Yet this assumption often goes unquestioned. You rarely ask whether clarity is insight or simply familiarity repeating itself. Al-Ghazali begins precisely here. He observes that most people inherit their beliefs without examining the basis of their certainty. They accept what is commonly accepted, and the repetition of an idea becomes its proof. He argues that the mind can mistake agreement for accuracy, coherence for reality, and habit for truth. You start to notice that what you call knowing may be nothing more than unchallenged confidence. If the mind is the instrument you use to verify truth, how do you verify the instrument itself? Al-Ghazali lived in a time when intellectual certainty was pursued with intensity. In Baghdad, philosophers debated logic, theologians defended doctrine, and mystics claimed direct insight. Each group believed its method alone could reach truth. This environment sharpened Al-Ghazali's awareness of a deeper issue. Every claim of certainty relied on assumptions rarely questioned. He saw that the diversity of confident voices revealed not clarity but confusion. If opposing views all presented themselves as unquestionably true, the issue lay not in the conclusions but in the foundations. If every school claimed certainty, how could one distinguish truth from confidence? Al-Ghazali examined the foundations of human knowing and found them unstable. Sensory knowledge could mislead, rational arguments could contradict one another, inherited beliefs could be false yet deeply trusted. This recognition did not appear as despair but as analytic clarity. If the tools of knowing are unreliable, the conclusions drawn from them cannot claim certainty. You begin to see the same issue in yourself. When you rely on perception, you depend on interpretations shaped by prior experience. When you rely on reason, you trust premises you have not examined. Each method reveals not only its strength but its limit. If doubt exposes the boundaries of knowledge, what exposes the boundaries of doubt? Reason has remarkable power. It analyzes, distinguishes, organizes, and clarifies. Yet Al-Ghazali noticed that reason cannot guarantee its own grounding. Every rational system rests on axioms that cannot be proven from within the system. To justify them, reason must use the very principles it is trying to validate, leading to circularity. You begin to understand that reason can operate effectively only after its foundations are assumed. It can build structures of impressive complexity, but it cannot verify the ground upon which those structures rest. Awareness of this limitation does not weaken reason, it simply defines its domain. Al-Ghazali therefore distinguished between what reason can illuminate and what it cannot reach. Reason can guide inquiry, but it cannot provide the ultimate certainty it seeks. When asked to justify its starting point, it becomes silent. You notice this silence in yourself. When you trace your beliefs back to their source, you eventually reach assumptions you cannot justify but cannot abandon. If reason cannot secure its foundations, can it secure anything built upon them? You often speak of I as though it were constant. You assume that the one who knew yesterday is the same one who knows today. Yet when you observe your inner life carefully, you notice continuous change. Thoughts shift, intentions fluctuate, judgments evolve, and moods alter perception. The self that claims certainty is not stable enough to guarantee anything. Al-Ghazali examined the self with the same rigor he applied to reason. He saw that the identity claiming to possess truth was itself uncertain. If the one who knows is in constant motion, how can its judgments claim permanence? The instability of the self becomes a central issue. Knowledge cannot rest on a foundation that is always changing. You see this instability in your own experience. The beliefs you once defended now seem incomplete. The positions you once held with conviction now appear revisable. What you called certainty often turned out to be temporary alignment between mind and circumstance. If revelation is not an external event but an internal recognition, what makes recognition possible? As Al-Ghazali investigated the nature of awareness, he noticed that awareness cannot be made into an object. You can observe your thoughts, but you cannot observe the observer with the same method. When you attempt to grasp awareness, you only encounter further content, thoughts, sensations, or memories. The observing capacity itself remains unobserved. You begin to understand the issue. Awareness makes knowledge possible, but it cannot be known as a thing. It is not an object among objects. It is the condition under which all objects appear. When you try to examine it, it cannot be captured, because examination requires treating it as something distinct from you. Al-Ghazali recognized that the failure of self-reflection is not a failure of effort but a structural limit. The ground of awareness cannot reflect itself the way external things do. Reflection always involves a division between observer and observed, but awareness is prior to that division. This leads to a profound realization. If the foundation of knowledge is awareness, and awareness cannot be made into an object, then the search for self-knowledge in the usual sense will never succeed. The searcher cannot step outside awareness to examine it. If awareness is what makes everything knowable, why can it not be known in the same way? From this point, Al-Ghazali argued that some truths are self-evident not because they have been proven but because denying them would undermine the very act of denial. Awareness of one's own existence is an example. It does not require verification by perception or reasoning. It is present before reflection begins. You see how this changes the structure of inquiry. Instead of building knowledge outward from arguments, awareness becomes the starting point. It is not a conclusion but a condition. True certainty is not the product of proof but the recognition of something that cannot be coherently doubted. Al-Ghazali concluded that genuine knowledge must rest on such immediate awareness. It is not constructed through logic but recognized through introspective clarity. This shift does not devalue reason. It simply places reason within its appropriate domain. You begin to see how this applies to your own search. The truths you cannot deny are not those you have proven but those that remain present even when you attempt to question them. They form an unshakable ground. If the deepest truths cannot be proven, why are they impossible to doubt? Al-Ghazali eventually distinguished between knowledge acquired and knowledge disclosed. Acquired knowledge is gathered through study, argument, and reflection. Disclosed knowledge appears when mental interference subsides. It is not manufactured by the mind but revealed when the mind becomes clear enough to receive it. You recognize this distinction in your own experience. Sometimes understanding arises not as a conclusion but as a quiet recognition. It does not feel like something added to the mind but like something uncovered. The clarity appears when distraction ends. For Al-Ghazali, this form of knowing represents the highest certainty. It does not depend on premises, perceptions, or the shifting states of the self. It emerges from a deeper level of awareness where truth is not constructed but allowed to appear. Reason remains valuable, but only within the limits of its function. It is not the foundation but a tool that points beyond itself. You begin to see how the mind often obstructs the very clarity it seeks. In its effort to grasp truth, it creates layers of thought that obscure the simplicity of direct recognition. If truth appears only when the mind becomes still, is seeking it an obstacle? Al-Ghazali did not conclude that reason must be abandoned. Instead, he argued that reason and direct awareness must be aligned. Reason helps articulate, analyze, and interpret experience, but it cannot supply the certainty of foundational truths. Insight provides the ground upon which reason operates. You notice that this reconciliation resolves the tension between thought and awareness. Reason serves as a guide within the realm of distinctions, while awareness reveals what lies before distinctions arise. When both operate within their proper domains, inquiry becomes balanced. Al-Ghazali saw that understanding is complete only when reason recognizes its limits and awareness recognizes its primacy. When the two are not confused, confusion ends. If reason is essential yet limited, how do you determine when to trust it? At this stage, Al-Ghazali observed that the desire to possess truth prevents genuine understanding. When you approach knowledge as something to acquire, you impose the self upon it. This imposes distortion. You begin to see that clarity arises when the will to own knowledge dissolves. You stop demanding that truth conform to your expectations. The mind becomes transparent. In this transparency, understanding is not something you hold. It is something that appears when you no longer interfere. Knowledge becomes a condition of awareness rather than an achievement of the self. If understanding appears only when you stop seeking, what is the role of effort? When the search reaches its end, inquiry becomes quiet. Not because questions have been answered, but because the need for answers loses force. Truth does not arrive as a conclusion. It remains as the clarity that persists when the movement of seeking subsides. You notice a stillness that is neither achievement nor surrender. It is simply the absence of interference. Awareness stands without needing verification. Nothing is added, nothing is taken away. Knowing is no longer an activity but a condition. In this quiet, certainty is not claimed. It is present. If the search ends in stillness, was there ever